Hey, Bella Jean Tears does something like a spirituality with a twist. Um, so Daniel has, we're gonna full disclosure,
Full disclosure, we're doing it.
same
We
gear.
haven't changed shirts, the same thing. It's just,
Uh,
yep.
no, but like we have the idea of like splitting these episodes up. So this is the second part of this thing. We're gonna like try to be part of your spiritual life even more.
That's right. Yeah.
So last episode we were just talking about Dr. Nita and really looking at the sutra thing and the tantra thing and these different approaches, like kind of using them as a discussion point for like different approaches of how you think about spirituality, especially the idea of attachment.
Hmm.
So, Dr. Nita has like a little chart where he compares these things. We can kind of kick this around and see the implications.
Yeah.
So, on the one hand, you could have spiritual paths that are kind of ones of renunciation.
Yes.
You step away from your desires, you pull away, and other ones where you're going to kind of work more on emotional transformation of your attachment and desires. And we would talk about that the last couple of episodes.
Yeah.
And then when you get to the ones that are more pulling back, then you're purposely trying to create avoidance of the emotions, avoidance of, yeah, you're purposely pulling back. Of course, in the most extreme parts of this is a monastic thing where otherwise you're kind of trying to do more of a direct confrontation and transformation of your feelings.
Mm.
And I mean, that's a kind of interesting one to kind of consider what that means practically when you start thinking about that. Do you kind of like step back from the things that are troubling, or do you like kind of like go towards them, right?
Right.
And try to like use them and embrace them.
Yeah.
I guess as we go through it all, we can think of what seems more challenging or more easy. And I think probably there's going to be parts that might seem more easy or more challenging to different people. But I guess if we get personal, I've always been very interested in this idea of like, I just, I guess it's like tantric intuition or tantric karma or something where I thought, well, okay, the
Yeah.
deeper thing for me has always seemed to be more, let me not run from these things, but try to like embrace them and use them. And then I had this notion in my mind that there was sort of a meaning behind them. I sort of had some idea that like these things wouldn't be here unless they had some purpose or something to them,
Mm.
if I always feel that way, if I've always kept up that faith or belief, but I've sort of felt that way most of the time, that they're here for some reason,
Hmm.
whether it's like sexual feelings, romantic feelings, stronger emotions. I thought, well, there's something to be learned from these things. There's some reason that they're here. Is that something you thought about a lot too, Daniel?
One of my favorite quotes, Robert Frost, the only way out is through.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I no, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
Confucius has one like that too. He says the way out is through the door. How come no one uses that method? It's a good one. Uh-huh.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, for sure. It's like, well, but I mean, but that's the whole, it's like one of our core tenets is like using your life as a teacher and
Yeah, check.
thus taking all the things that are part of it. And like in my notes, I put obstacles that have a purpose, but like I don't even know that I could say that they're obstacles, they're opportunities, really, but it really does depend. And and look, we are very kind of aware of we're not kind of aware, we're extremely aware of the vast differences in people's lives and potential for difficulty and suffering based on socioeconomic status, place in the world, gender identity, all the things, very class stuff. Okay, fine. But there is an aspect of how you're going to see your own particular journey and what's in it in order to be able to help you progress in your life to whatever that is. There is that goes across all bounds. Now, of course, you have to hear things, as we talked about in our previous episode of, thus I heard, or have I heard overheard one time.
Yeah, yeah.
You have to be introduced to some of these things. So I always feel very fortunate to have been introduced to them. And that is one reason why, and I'm sure Eric, it's the same way for you. We're so passionate about sharing these things because it is truly life altering if you could put those goggles on and say, all right, this is, I use a euphemism a lot, but this is fodder to my fire.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So I suppose like on some level, for me, you might think, well, we're all going to go through our ups and downs of this. What I'm trying to get to is, okay, I'm going to follow a path where I'm going to be more embracing of these things and I get hurt.
Yeah.
I go through and I put my heart out, maybe in some connection with another person, I get hurt, or I put myself in some venture, put my heart out and I get hurt, or wherever that might be.
Yeah.
And there can be that like flinching back feeling of
Yeah.
like, oh man, maybe this is a mistake. Maybe I should be more like those 10% happier people we were talking about last episode, and I should be more non-attached.
Yes.
So I mean, there's that aspect, but um, even in all of that, I still think, it's another option of how to live your life, you know?
And Eric, even in that statement, it's like it's not attached to the outcome. You're
Well, I
attached,
think,
you know what I'm saying? Like
yeah.
you're still attached to the process.
Mm,
You know what I mean? Like you're still gonna do it. And so, like, I me and my brother, we share many things and we're different people and he'll be on actually. So I'm looking forward to that. I think at the
oh,
beginning
okay, yeah,
of
yeah.
February.
Huh?
And him and I both, and I just found this out today, we both pray the same way. I
Mm,
never ask for anything. I never ask because I don't believe that whatever it is that I'm praying to is Santa. And that
mhm,
like, here's my wish list of things that I want. Please give it to me. You know what I'm saying? But that I always ask for the highest good.
mhm.
And in comparison, my brother always asks to be a tool for the best outcome.
Yeah, it's nice.
You know? And so in
Yeah.
this way, you're not, I'm attached to the process, but I'm inherently not attached to the outcome because I'm leaving that open to the whatever it is. They say the hand that writes the story of the universe or whatever it is,
Yeah. Well, I mean, is it like, I'll do the Dr. Nita thing,
Please.
as we go through, then a lot of times you can describe this as like sort of like he's a medical person too. We're medical people. So you can sometimes describe this as like the allopathic approach, where you try to like work against the passions. And I mean, in the extremes of this, there are like meditative visualizations. He talks about like sexual desire, right?
Mm.
And some of these things is you purposely try to like undermine your sexual feelings, your romantic feelings by like looking at the negatives
Yeah.
of your object of attachment. Like, well, she looks really good on the outside, but inside she's full of all these ugly things, and there's caca and pee pee inside, and
That's
whatever,
true.
like that kind of thing, and like
Yeah.
you're purposely trying to undermine this. And so he talks about, in the extremes of it, that's part of the tradition. Probably most of us as 21st century people aren't going to do that, but it does relate back to this idea of, trying to minimize and downplay the emotions, downplay the passions, as opposed to embracing them and thinking of them as like we were talking about the fires of transformation or something like that.
Hmm.
So anyways, he talks about that issue where the tantras might be more of like what he calls like a homeopathic approach, where you're kind of treating like with like or something.
Hmm.
And then a lot of the visualizations are much more um you know intentionally. If we go to really tantra, and we're going to be doing a Buddhist retreat, tantra retreat, through our little podcast coming up next year, just to give it a little hype.
Next year, bro, it's not even two
Oh,
months.
it's not even next year, it's 2025.
We're already in 2025. It's not
Yeah,
even,
we're months away.
we're like 7 weeks away.
Okay, so yeah, we're hopping, but we do this thing.
Eric Sykes coming up next year. Woo! Oh, wait a minute. No, okay, it's
It's
way
like
far.
I'm already still in 2024 on some level.
Yeah, well, what do I say? Ignorance is bliss. You know what I mean?
2024, we both talked about it when we did our episodes. 24, dicey year, dicey
Yeah,
year.
yeah,
Um, but in any case, you'll do things where you're really, the meditation techniques themselves are much more sort of like focused on things that could be, sexual or erotic imagery, right?
yep, yep.
And you purposely do that. You visualize things that are, supposed to be saucy and things that are supposed to be frisky, right? And the goal of that is not to like dampen down the pleasures, but to like almost learn how to meditatively work with them and like heighten them up,
Yes.
right? And drive them up, right? With the idea that you kind of enhance the sexual imagery. I mean, it was strange for me because I started off doing Zen, and all of a sudden you think, okay, I'm counting my breath and doing this stuff, to go to a thing where, okay, now I'm going to like use this very kind of strong erotic imagery meditatively, but it's powerful, right? And then
Hmm.
the goal would be then to increase the pleasure, increase the bliss, and then learn how to like work with those feelings and sort of transform them.
Mm.
He has a kind of a funny anecdote that he kind of shares in the book, Dr. Nida, where he's
Yeah.
talking about this and being angry about something. I think he's telling like he missed a plane or something like that. He was stuck in the airport and he was angry and frustrated about it. And then he kind of took that anger and directed it down like almost to like the pelvis, the fires that are kind of there, in the pelvis where like all the good fire energy is, right?
Yeah.
We're going to work on that a little bit on our retreat too, to learn how to ignite those fires, right?
Yes.
That are kind of like the sources of sexual pleasure, but also sources of spiritual transformation.
Yeah.
You're a Chinese medical person. Sometimes we call this kidney yang or the Ming Men fire, the life gate fire. So he talks about like kind of directing that energy downward and like using that to like spark more of that fire. And that's the tantric thing to do, to like
Yeah.
not try to dampen the emotions, but okay, there's the emotion, let me work at it in some way.
Hmm.
And in this case, even trying to use that, if you know how to use some of that sexual imagery, you can kind of take some of those feelings that might be negative and like flip them,
Yeah.
right, and turn them into things that are much more pleasurable, right, by doing those inner transformations. So part of the whole idea of this, right, is to embrace these things and work to like transform them. So anyways, a little bit on the tantra and sutra part of this.
Yeah.
I got a couple other things I was thinking about in terms of repression and this kind of stuff. Do you got other stuff you want to talk about first, or?
No, that's great.
Yeah. So I was, this was like the first of our little podcast notes that I prepped up after my retreat.
Hmm.
So usually for me, Daniel and I have our retreat schedules. I get little breaks between my semesters, so I like to take my retreats then. So I was doing it over the holidays, and I was really thinking about, my meditations there, and I had sort of a weird experience where I was kind of working through different ways of visualizing the energies in the body, and I had a little thing where I I had like a little epiphany that I was almost doing it wrong.
Mm.
But it was interesting. I was doing some meditations. I started to have some little visions, right, of things. I wasn't thinking like right then I was doing it wrong, but I was having little visions. And then sometimes you can do on retreat in the tantras. I was opening up the books and studying the meditations that you're supposed to be doing. And then something clicked for me. I realized like, wow, I was visualizing this one way, but I could visualize this another way. And that was exactly sort of what I was seeing in my little vision. So I had a little burst of like inspiration during my retreat. And it got me really thinking about, this meditation on sexuality and a lot about repression.
Mm.
So I also began thinking about repression. And, then when I was doing the notes, Dr. Nida talks about this as well. Um, Roundabout way to get to it. But let me talk about the repression a little bit thing, and then I'll try to get back to my meditative experience. We'll kind of try to wrap this shit up.
Sure.
But, he gets to the idea of talking about repression and how repression can sort of lead to pathology, as a medical person. And I was thinking about that a lot on my retreat, how repression really can be a source of pathology. So that's another question to think about, I guess, how we think about our emotions and our desires and the tantra versus non-tantric paths.
Well, who is that, Eric? Was it Robert Reich? Is that who has the
Wilhelm Reich.
Wilhelm Reich? Yeah, who has
Mhm.
the that as part of his somatic patterning of this
Yeah.
psychological view of the human being as its means to protect the psyche is by moving these repressed feelings into the body in certain zones.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's definitely like he thinks those two mirror each other, right? You repress
Yeah.
psychologically and your body will mirror that back almost, right? Like two sides of a coin or something. But maybe the way you're saying it too, that you can push the emotional things into the body so they're stored. It's another kind of way of what is it, the book everyone loves now, The Body Keeps Score or something
Yes.
like The Body Keeps a Score. So when doctors need this thing, he talks about this on like an institutional level. If you have a lot of repression within a culture, sometimes this
Ah.
shit will pop out in like pathological ways. I
Mm.
think you're right. Wilhelm Reich is really interested in that too.
Yeah.
He talks about it in sort of like the religious context where people are repressing their sexuality and you get these terrible abuse scandals,
Oh,
right? He's not, it's interesting because he doesn't give Tibetan culture a pass on that either.
right.
Because we have those problems too. It's not just Catholics in the United States or other,
Right.
groups that have these problems. He says, yeah, we have those problems too. We can get parts that are repression, repressive, and this can lead to, terrible outcomes, right? Terrible behaviors, sexually driven misbehaviors, right? And
Yeah.
he kind of links that. So I thought, well, that's bold that he does that, right?
Mhm.
That's cool, for him to acknowledge that, and not just point the fingers at others, but to point the fingers back and say, yeah, we have those same problems, right?
Yeah.
And then he talks about in individual cases, right? That this repression can be a problem. Yeah. And then he has a really funny one that he shares. I'll just give it as a little clinical anecdote,
Sure.
more extreme than the patients we would see. But, he had someone he saw who was a nun. You like this one because there's a shamanic aspect to it too. So this nun came up to him, this Buddhist nun came up to him and said, I'm possessed. Can you do an exorcism for me and like get rid of this evil spirit? And it's very charming the way he talks about it. He says he was very excited about it because it's like, cool, I get to do an exorcism, you know,
Yay.
something shamanic for this nun. Awesome.
Yeah.
That's a doctor, right? Can't wait to do my treatment. But then he goes along and he asks the woman, well, what's the symptoms of this possessing spirit? And she
Yeah.
says, well, it's terrible. I get all of these like weird feelings, and then my body feels all strange, and then I don't know what to do. And eventually the only way for me to fix this is I have to like, and she's very like, and she said, I have to masturbate, you know? And then he went, that's not a demon. That's just sex. And you're having these problems around this.
Yeah.
And I guess she didn't really fully want to hear that.
Mm.
And I think she even talked to her teacher, who was very much like an ascetic person.
Right.
Dr. Anita is not. And the teacher was like, oh, I have those problems too. I think it's a demon. And Dr. Anita is like, no. And he kind of uses that as a place of talking about what happens when you have like repression,
Yeah.
that it creates these problems. In this case, the physical symptoms. As doctory people, we would probably talk about that as being like somatization, right?
Yeah.
You're repressing the sexual feelings and they're coming out in this physical stuff. And so those kinds of things, which got me thinking about one of our subject matters that we talk about a lot, which is questions of repression. And I was thinking about that in my retreat too. So I think I wanted to do a little bit on sort of the psychology of this a little bit, giving a shout out to one of our
Sure.
favorite people, Esther Perel, who we talk about a lot,
Yeah.
right? And this whole question of like, what does it mean to like repress, and then the whole problem, if your goal is maybe that kind of thing like Dr. Anita's talking about with this nun, right? With this Buddhist nun. She's trying to follow this thing, but like the desires are being repressed and they're not going to go away. They're going to still be there.
Right.
So the desires will sort of naturally be there. And Esther Perel is again kind of I call her almost like a neo-Freudian.
Yeah.
Who's basically saying like, no, these things aren't going to go away, and you're going to get kind of neurotic aspects. So I think that's something we all have to think about when we think about, how we're going to like approach our spirituality and like really, be honest with ourselves about this, right?
Mhm.
What's really happening. Because I think, and that's something we talk about a lot, but I think, you're going to have sexual feelings, you're going to have intellectual attachments to other people, you're going to have emotional attachments to other people.
Yeah.
What are you going to do with those?
Yeah.
Try to repress them and cut them off? If you can, maybe you can, but sometimes it'll be that repression thing, and then that will kind of eat away at you, potentially cause problems that are psychological or physical. And I like Dr. Anita kind of approaching that directly, right?
Yeah.
You got thoughts on that one? I mean, I
Yeah.
think
I mean,
it has to be talked about, right?
yeah. So, and I guess like if you want to look at it, okay, so if you're looking at it from the view of a monastic, which nobody who's listening to this is, but I'll just do that. I'll do that for to juxtapose that to the other piece. If you're looking at it from the perspective of a monastic or an incel, that your relationship is with the divine, or from an outside perspective, we could say with yourself. So you are all that you need. In most relationships in today's society, they are monogamous, i.e., you have one partner, that partner has everything that you should need, supposedly, right? And that is where you should funnel and be fulfilled. Now, as society moves forward and there are more conversations around relationship type, right? We've had some conversations with our, friend Phaedra, who will be on again. Eric has talked about some things in the past from himself and from some of his people in different kind of relationship communities. There's a more not necessarily open appetite for indulgence, but there's an appetite for engagement into different relationship opportunities, and so you take that from that perspective. But all of this is to say is that it opens up the conversation around, is one enough? And it, whether you agree or disagree with is one enough is actually irrelevant. The bigger question that comes out of this, or the bigger conversation that comes out of this question, is that of what we would consider outside attachments. They
Mhm.
happen, full stop, to everyone. And it's not a matter of if, it's when. And then the next question is, to what you're asking and to what Dr. Nita is then discussing, what are you going to do about it? So you cannot simply ignore it. And I know that, some maybe more traditionalists might say that's exactly what you do. But are you really ignoring it, or are you repressing it and trying to run from it? And so I have enjoyed a lot of Esther Perel's work because what comes out of these discussions is much larger conceptual conversations around connection and how those things are layered on top of each other. And then if you have, and relating it to a partnership, if you have a partner, regardless of whatever your relationship type, there's usually a home base, you know, a main partner, if you will, or just a single partner, if you will, to be able to have these discussions is actually very healthy because a lot of times we just assume things. We just assume that this person is my intellectual equal, my sexual equal, my emotional equal, my physical, but that's rarely is that the case. Rarely is that the case. And so to not acknowledge it, whether you do anything about it, and when I say do, I mean like pursue or whatever, but to not acknowledge it is absolutely repression. And I don't think it's for me, and there are people who might totally disagree. I don't think it's healthy to just repress those things. I think at a bare minimum, they should be aired out and talked about and not shamed and not tabooed because I don't think that I don't think that helps the person who is doing that shaming or tabooing to the person who's experiencing it. And I don't think it does any service to the person who is experiencing them to repress those things because ultimately they are naturally arising. Now, obviously, if you're in a monogamous relationship and you're womanizing, you have another family and a bunch of mistresses or misters or whatever, probably not ideal ethically for your life and those people's lives. That's a selfish thing. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying the variety of connections that are available are felt and they are hopefully genuine and they should all be discussed at a bare minimum, discussed, not repressed. And so I wanted to just go there because we're talking about relationships, we're talking about sexuality, we're talking about connection, partnership, and ultimately our own kind of like pleasure and desire states, and this is absolutely in my mind a part of it.
Yeah, like for me, when I was putting together this part, I thought about the Esther Perel stuff. We've done episodes on this in the past before,
Yeah,
like uses this language of uniqueness versus exclusivism. So exclusivism is more like the monogamy. Uniqueness is people who are more open to other types of relationships, emotionally or sexually or whatever that might be. I think
sure.
when we attachment theory stuff, I have some really cool stuff to share about like charting out how people feel about these things. We'll get to it. So
Yeah,
foreshadowing.
yeah,
Sneak preview things to come. But when I was thinking about this part, I'm definitely like an advocate for like the uniqueness thing, but I wasn't even thinking about that here. I was going to like semi-shelf that, except to say, I think what you're talking about is that if that's going to happen, right?
yeah.
I think that's the Esther Perel point. That's the Sigmund Freud point before that. There's going to be other feelings. There's going to be other attractions. There's going to be whatever it's going to
Well,
be.
that's Dr. Nita's point too.
Yeah, it's going to happen, and one of the things I think I wanted to like say about this is that I've been saying a lot with Chinese medicine too to some students, our day jobs.
That's right.
But I've been saying like Chinese medicine hates repression,
Yes.
doesn't like it. It will work against it. If you
Yeah.
try to repress, it'll fight you.
Yeah.
And I think meditation is like that too. It does not like repression.
No.
It'll poke right at those things. That awareness will cause you some problems. So I think however you handle it, I want to just like acknowledge that piece. That was my goal in this too. So I think we're on the same page. I just
Yeah.
wanted to acknowledge like whatever your philosophy is, we'll episodes for a different time. But at least for here, like we're going to have probably lots of feelings for different kinds of people. And if you get into the repression part, it causes problems, right?
Yeah.
It's going to cause problems.
And
Yeah.
sometimes if you get into the expression part, that causes problems too.
Different kinds of problems.
That's right.
So, like, I think the old school, if I get to the psychology of it, people like when I do psychology, the old school Freud thing was you have to make the unconscious conscious. That was his big saying, right?
Yes.
You can't put things in the unconscious, they'll stew,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Now, again, like we were saying, Asian culture, Chinese medicine, meditation probably won't let you do it. Doesn't want you to do it. But even if you get to the point where you're not thinking about that, you're going to have to like come to some probably to deal with this, right? One way or
Yeah.
the other.
Yeah.
And I think Freud's thing was that you would do sublimation, that you would direct that into things that would be more productive. You would take those things that could be repressed and eat away at you, and you'll okay, I'm aware of them. I'm aware
Yeah.
that they're there. I'm going to choose what I want to do with them, and some of these things maybe you would sort of transform into creative activity, you know. So maybe I think we did this when we did our defense mechanisms episode, like way back some months ago. We were talking about the psychological defenses
Yeah.
from Freud's daughter, but maybe you have this and you direct it into your
Oh, from
writing.
Anna Freud, the psychology of Anna Freud.
Freud, and like
Yeah, those were well
all of a
received.
sudden you're doing like very erotic writing, or you're doing erotic paintings, or you put it into your music, or you do something with it.
Yeah,
You know, I think if you're doing the tantras, then that goes into your meditation. And we'll talk about that a little bit, I suppose, when we do our retreat as well.
we definitely will.
But like how do you take some of those emotions and like direct that into the meditation? So, you know, I still have longing thoughts for my first love, Tina. In my
Tina.
private moments. Oh, Tina,
Oh, Tina.
I lost you. And but you take some of those feelings and you learn how to direct it, like Dr. Anita was saying with his anger. You learn how to direct that into some way that's meditative.
Yeah,
You get on like Instagram and try to find Tina, that's a different move.
right. That's the
Assuming you're not
external.
going to do that.
That's the external expression, you know.
Assuming you're not going to do that and you want to learn how to do that in some way meditatively, that's part of the tantra. So you're not repressing then,
Right.
So I think that's an important subject matter, right?
Yeah.
And that was a little bit what I was thinking about during my retreat. I was like, it was very interesting. I hadn't done the meditations on like the third eye, but I did them. There's a part of the sort of the tantric path that I'm trying to follow. And it kind of goes in steps. The meditations go in like different meditations and different steps. That's one of the cool things I think about the tantras is sometimes they have these meditations that kind of build on one another,
Yeah.
little stages, and they kind of interlock and build. And so I got to the point where I was like, I'm going to do the third eye. And it was kind of trippy. I saw a whole bunch of weird shit. So I was like, oh, this is cool. I'm like, obviously there's something happening here. I can definitely say that the mandala that I was visualizing got like uber real. It got like super real. So that seemed to happen, at least for me. But it was first popping a little bit. It was interesting because I started seeing like little visual things appear before me. And one of them was sort of like a tantric couple. And it was like sort of they were yellow and they were kind of floating before me.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, what's this about?
Simpsons.
And then I realized it was Marge and Homer, and I was like, this is a big letdown.
Deep
All
tantric
this
pair.
meditation just to see some saucy version of The Simpsons. Okay. No, but I was like, no, this is like, the different energies have different colors in the Buddhist tantras.
Sure.
And I was reading from one of the great tantras, the Tantra of the Secret Assembly. And they were talking about how you can visualize this sort of the more sexual energies kind of in the pelvis, you know, in the
Mm.
lower jiao, we say in Chinese medicine, the pelvis, the lower elixir field, you might say in the tantras. So I was like, yeah, I was thinking about that. And then I was, reading the tantric text and they were saying, oh yeah, you could visualize the energies that are sort of the sexual energies in this yellow color. And I went, oh, I was just seeing that shit.
There you go.
Cool. I'm going to do that. And it was pretty awesome. I realized it did change the feeling of this for me. And, it was
Mm.
kind of powerful. It was one of the cooler parts of the retreat, and it was a good retreat. So in the tantras, they talk about this thing, the energy that controls sort of the pelvis, and especially the releasing in the pelvis. They call it the downward voiding wind, fancy name. But the idea is it controls things like urination, defecation from a medical point of view.
Oh, fun.
Um, if you're doing gynecology, it would control sort of like the menstrual flow, right? But it also related to sexuality, right? Because it's the energies in the pelvis, have a lot to do with like the sexual feelings, right? Ejaculation, but also just sexual feelings. No matter who you are, no matter what equipment you got, this is related to sexual feeling. So it was interesting because I was thinking about this and I was going, yeah, these energies are, I was really kind of understanding them in a new way. And when I got to the medical side with us being medical people, I was like, these energies are really sexual, but they also have to do a lot with like what's happening in that part of the body in other ways. And I thought, how many patients do I have who maybe have like repressed sexual feelings and also have problems with like constipation and
Mm-hmm.
like irritable bowel syndrome
Mm-hmm.
and all these kinds of things. And like the full, I mean, I've had that thought before, obviously, but I think really feeling those energies and how they all are kind of connected.
Mm-hmm.
All those energies are kind of entwined together, the sexual energies and the energies that relate to like, the GI tract and symptoms that are digestive or people who have urinary complaints. I started going, yeah, this probably is really a thing for so many people. And it kind of clicked to me. And I thought, wow, a lot of this is probably sexual repression, right? All the different kinds of feelings like that are kind of being like smooshed down, right? And then, they're going to semanticize out. They're going to become physical things in so many ways. And we both know from our medical practices how many people come in with GI complaints.
Yeah.
It's hard to find patients who don't have any, right?
Yeah.
Almost, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's not the chief thing, that they're coming in for. You do your whole thorough intake, and then by the end, you're going, well, do you have GI problems? And they're ubiquitous, really,
Yeah.
right? So the full force of that kind of like really hit me, this whole idea of like, in that very immediate way, that experiential tantric way you were been talking about in these episodes, Daniel. This is an experiential path,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I went, yeah. And then it also got me thinking about my medical stuff. So I thought I would share the story,
Yeah.
right? Because it kind of crystallized for me in this very clear way. And I don't know what totally to do about that from a clinical perspective. It's hard to talk with people and say, well, maybe part of your GI problems is you're repressing a bunch of emotions, especially when it gets to the emotions that are these, because they're kind of taboo emotions on some level, right?
And you
I think
don't want
Esther
to,
Perel knows that. I think Freud knows that. These are taboo things for people, right?
well, and okay, so we might have a sense that there is a repressed emotion, right? So we like to use the line from the Wang Dine Jing, the Yellow Emperor's book. Um, but they say in adults treat the liver.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And so and we've talked about, you've mentioned this before, I've mentioned this before. Why is because this is the organ system that is all about free flowing and expressing. It wants growth, it wants movement, it wants expression, it wants visioning, it wants planning forward. When that cannot happen, and for various reasons, um, it then repression happens. And so for Chinese medicine folk, this is commonplace. They call it liver qi stagnation,
yeah,
i.e., the energy of the forward movement of flow is not flowing. Okay, so in some repression states, you can have something constipation, right? Like Eric mentioned earlier. But in in a deeper psycho-emotional sense, you can say if something wasn't expressed, it's going to get repressed or stagnant in this way. And so we might have an inclination based on some clinical findings that I won't go into anymore because we're already in Chinese medical weeds now as it is, but it's interesting stuff. We might have some inclination that there is a psychological component to it. There always is, anyways, but sometimes it is physical, like it's just a blockage somewhere. But whatever. Okay, so we let's say we assume that there is some psychological component, which I'm going to say probably is 8 out of 10 people. There is some psychological component. We could say 10, but I'm going to make it give plausible deniability. We'll say eight. Okay, but that doesn't mean that we know what it is. That only means that we are aware that, like, there's something here that is probably beyond just the physical. And the physical is hard enough to deal with, but there's some psychological thing. Of course, then we can go and ask questions as to what the feeling is around this, what color does it look like, what does it smell like, what memories coming up. We could do all those things, right? To kind of differentiate. But the point that I'm trying to make is that, like, it is there. We're not going to make an assumption about it, but that it is there and it does happen, and so the question is not necessarily, you know, uh, is it happening, but how often? And then the next part would be, well, what to do about it? And so, you kind of talked about sublimation, right? Changing that those energies and putting it into something different. And then we don't ever really do this, but like, getting some kind of treatment, even if you're not directly addressing it, but some kind of somatic treatment, whether that be acupuncture, dance therapy, massage, whatever, on top of your meditation practice, all of which is going towards the same ends, which is to help the movement of these things to come up to the surface, out, to kind of help release them as a callback to our previous episode recorded oh so long ago, back to moksha in the release, because that ultimately is where things are going to flow through, as an open hand, not a closed one.
I think the thing that really struck me about it, because we've been doing Chinese medicine for a long time, both with our
Yeah.
own practices, and like a lot of times when we talk about the kind of stagnation of energy things you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
You think about the liver, and then in Chinese medical thought, the liver has a lot to do with anger.
Yeah.
So I've thought a lot about, like, the anger aspects of this. And I think for a lot of us as, Chinese medical doctors, for people who might be listening, but we're educating people too, who don't know about this, you can get repressed anger and that can create a lot of GI symptoms too. I think the thing that really hit me when I had this little epiphany in my little vision of this, and I started really meditating on the feeling of this, and it was interesting because I thought about the liver energies and its
Yeah.
regulation of flow in the body, but it was a little bit of a different way of visualizing it. And I was like, yeah, it really brought home the idea of, like, probably a lot of this stuff isn't just like repressed anger or frustration,
Yeah.
but unfulfilled desires are sometimes mentioned here
Yeah.
too, with the energy not being able to go. And then in this case, really unfulfilled desires that are really probably like sexual,
Yeah.
or passionate or whatever that would mean, right?
Sure.
So anyways, I just, wanted, to talk about that. And maybe this is a little bit where we had mentioned this idea. Can we do innovations and how we're trying to present things to people?
Yeah.
Obviously, Tantra, Taoism, these are beautiful old traditions, right? But for us doing it now, we're trying to, like, present it in new ways, maybe show other ways, bringing things together that maybe hadn't been talked about together. And I think I had the exact same thought, the Qi stagnation parts of Chinese medicine and Taoist thought mixed with these sort of tantric ideas, and I wonder in the end, like, how often it is the case that, these are the things that are being repressed and they're hard to talk about. They're very hard to talk.
Yeah.
It's
And if they
kind
don't,
of like, yeah, go ahead.
if they don't get expressed, then it just become it festers and it gets worse. And that's on an internal perspective. On an external perspective, in society, things that don't get expressed fester, and then they become gross. You know,
Yeah.
this is what happens, and then you get weird, in the body you can get weird growths, or weird body functions that are not healthy. On society's level, you get weird pockets of people who believe weird things because they haven't sublimated their own repressed desires, or traumas, or both. And then you get weird stuff that pops up, and then other people latch onto it because they have similar repression. And it's not that, like, their situation was that unique. It's that the human, I don't know, we can call it physiopsychology, is the same for human beings. And because we're all, so deeply interconnected, that we're all going to experience similar things, and it's going to get repressed, and then it's going to come out in a number of ways, and then we're going to have these, weird microclimates or weird micro communities, that share similar angers and passions for things, because they have yet to express themselves. And I'm not talking about like, people who get together and like, feed the homeless. I'm talking about, people who live like an alternative online have an alternative online presence and have a, kind of like ulterior motive or are
A lot of this
radicalized.
needs to be kind of toxic or something, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
it
toxic
becomes
gets to
not
the
good.
core of it, right? Because when things get stagnant, almost as a principle, medical principle, things get stagnant. That's where the
Yeah.
infection is going to happen, right?
Yes. Yes.
Things get stagnant, like a community and a society and culture. That's where those things are going to go toxic, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess it gets to this. There's different ways of trying to handle this, and this, we get to the end of the episode,
Yeah.
right? How do
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
pull it together? I suppose there's different ways of trying to handle this in like a spiritual path kind of a way, but to the extent that we're advocating a tantric approach, right? It's this idea where you have to like not smush those things down, right?
Mhm.
Because they can come out in these more toxic forms, right? And then, I think part of maybe the genius of like the spiritual paths we're talking about, Taoism and Tantrism and Zen things and all this. Like, okay, we're not going to repress these things.
Yeah.
We're going to transform them so they don't sit there and fester, right? Then we'll try to give you tools and techniques to learn how to do this, which is essentially part of my retreat too, right? How do you learn how to meditate on these energies that are kind of powerful, right?
Yeah.
Sexual energy, powerful, right? But how do you learn how to do that in a way where they're not repressed, but you're
Yeah.
also like handling them in skillful ways, to help yourself grow as a person,
Yeah.
right? And then, in ways that you can also be of help to others. So,
Yeah.
anyways, kind of the capper on the thing seems like a good place to stop with this. But
Perfect. Perfect
yeah, I
place
mean
to stop.
that's like how do you handle attachment,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and these energies around it. All right, cool. Thanks for sharing, Daniel. I think
Yeah.
it was this I thought was a like the episodes we've been doing have been important. This one I thought was kind of important to me on some level to really kind of
Absolutely.
start to flesh this thing out again, so to
Absolutely.
speak. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Eric, as always, gracias a mucho. Audience, thank you so much for listening, for watching, for tuning in. Hit us up, ginandtantra@gmail.com. Like, comment, subscribe, support our work. We definitely appreciate it. We do this for the love of it. You know what I'm saying? This is our passion. So we are not, nobody's funding us. We don't have advertisers. We don't ask for donations. We don't do any of those things. You know, this is all what we are sharing exactly what we would like to share with our friends, with our loved ones, and with those who find it interesting and maybe even motivational, because we find it interesting and motivational to engage in these kind of conversations, to keep our studies up, to keep ourselves, honed, because it is the purpose of our lives, and in a positive way. I could say for myself, I can't speak for Eric. This is my attachment, and I'm okay, and I'm conscious of it, and I'm okay with it. Uh,
Yeah, well said. Yeah,
that is
well,
why I came here, and that is why I stay here. So, and until I feel like my work is done, until I feel like my work is done, I will continue to return, even to this difficult space. You know what I'm saying? So,
even to this samsaric path,
yep,
this mortal coil,
that's right, that's right. So,
obstacle
audience,
we call life. Yeah.
yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.